So Matt, here we are in LA together. Would it be the right note to strike at the outset for me to say a few things about how we met and why I think why it's overdetermined that we're here and why it matters to me at least that we're here?
Go for it.
And then we go from there. So long before I was a painter, so this would be like, what year was it that we met? 2003?
2004.
2004. I was a visiting critic at the Yale School of Art where this young man was élève.
Less than young.
And I was there for like 10 years, visited a lot of studios, but it was Matt that I remembered and kind of, not fetishized, but held in a kind of sacred regard as an example of, almost like ethnographic, anthropological, like this is an artist. This is the real artist. Seriously. And I think it's because, first of all, when I went into your studio, you said, I'm from San Francisco and I've been around the block and I'm gay and this is like, I'm over this place or something.
No, but I had, to rewind, I had kind of chosen Yale. Well, I mean, I was the only school I got into, but I was kind of chasing you a little bit because I was a fan already, so I was determined to sign up on the right sign-up sheet. But
Wow.
I was an older graduate student, so I was.
But you
able
weren't that
to,
much older, but you were probably only like 3 years older.
No, I was like 10 years older than most of the kids.
But the sense that I had from you is that you were a connoisseur of a kind of life art mix, like gay Fluxus San Francisco thing, whatever that would have been. Edgy.
I mean, I was coming from 10 years in New York, and I was really.
Why do I remember San Francisco?
I don't know. But I am from California originally, but I think at grad school I was incredibly happy to be. I was like escaped from New York, and I think actually the 10-year older thing gave me this benefit that I was just incredibly happy to not have a job and to have a really good studio, and so I was in a good place when you met me.
And the good place I remember is that you were actually, at some point in that first studio visit, I remember this like lightning flash kind of awakening that we had looked at paintings on the wall, none of which you were very committal about. Is that you said like, there's that. We could look at this one. We could look at that. There were a lot, and then at some point, almost as in a gesture of like a shrug, like, well, we're done with the official visit. Let's just sit on the floor. Are you interested? And you had a stack of paintings on paper. I guess they were drawings, but I think they were paintings on paper. And you said we can look through these if you want. And we sat and you flipped through them, and each one was really wondrous in its spontaneity, in its non-resemblance to the other one, and it's some kind of, it's almost as if that was a thinking space in which you could process everything in the 20th century that interested you as a kind of casual notation.
I mean, I was really determined to use grad school to take apart what I was doing beforehand. So I was super free at that point. I feel like I haven't been that free for a while, but yeah. And I'm a domestic studio maker, so my studios always have couches and record players and other couches, and so yeah. I feel like. But
you remember that stack or a stack like that?
I mean, I remember my energy back then was that everything was grist for the mill. I still feel that way, but yeah, the floor was the staging ground, basically, and still kind of is for me.
And I still say, I don't know if people who know Matt only as a mature artist and come to him now have that as fixed a sense as I do that your ethical center was in a place like that stack of drawings, and that you were compared to, at least, not to demonize like Yale MFA students, but certainly many in the painting department were about channeling energy into one very ambitious, very thought out product that was masterfully done, but just very thought through and contemplated and workshopped, as it were, and you were just, there was a kind of notational thing that made me, as a non-painter at that point, but just as a writer who was interested in the New York school and diaries, that I thought, wow, you're a diarist, but you're doing it with marks.
Yeah, I mean, I had trouble. I had spent 10 years in New York, not really showing my work to anyone, but I still had a studio the whole time, and I made really small paintings, and back then it was pre-digital, and they didn't really show up that well on 35 millimeter slide sheets. That was how I had to apply for everything, and I was like kind of shit out of luck by the time I went to Yale, and I kind of had like not a nervous breakdown, but I had my last worst job in New York that.
What was it?
It's a really embarrassing job. I worked, one of my best friends from high school was the chief technical operator for an online dating company. And I was the tech support, and I had no concept of computers. And I checked, the thing I did for like a year at the beginning was to look for like penises and vaginas on the ads and take them down.
What's tech about that? That seems curatorial.
Yeah, I don't know. I know.
You know?
And then I moved on to hiring other people to do that. But no, I just had the like most kind of.
Was it Rent Boy?
It was nerve.com. It was not even. It wasn't even gay. Although,
I
however
think
much I tried to make it gay.
That's a way you intersected with what they call the zeitgeist. In some way, it wasn't. I'll just walk. This has nothing to do with art, but maybe it does. I think that I would say the worst job I ever had was when I was a temp and I worked for the Girl Scout headquarters in New York City. And what I will never forget is that my task one entire summer day was to collate responses to a survey that Girl Scout leaders from across the land had taken. And like, for example, how many people complained about the absence of grapefruit spoons?
Wow.
I'll never forget that. There were no grapefruit, whatever. So I think that's the worst job I ever had.
Yeah.
But if we could just like kind of.
But yeah, I was post. I mean, it wasn't. I did work at Burger King, so I had worse
That's
jobs
worse,
than that.
worse.
But yeah, I was just like, I was ready. I felt I had been semi against graduate school, and I had applied like 5 years earlier. I got into CalArts and I didn't go, mostly because I was afraid of money stuff. And then at the end of like, I think when you live in New York, there's a thing maybe this happened to you. There's a thing when you've been there for 10 years that you have to do something. You're either going to stay forever or you're going to mix it up a little bit. And it was also 2004, which I think was a particularly bad time in New York for doing anything creative or money stuff, and or not having money. Yeah, and I was just ready for it. So I think I was like the anti-grad student, but I was like, and then I only got into Yale, and I hated New Haven, and you lived there for a long time, but it was just a surreal experience to move to have been in New York for 10 years, and then as like a 33-year-old move to a small town an hour and a half away. But I totally dived in. So when you and I met, I was just like taking apart and I was making small, really resolved, before, as I got in, I was making these kind of like quirky abstractions, and I was, at the point you and I met, I was getting super bored with them. Like I could kind of just like, I could like make them. And then weirdly, I think I was one of like 2 people making abstract paintings in the incoming class in 2004.
But they were. It was. I remember. It's the way I always feel about your work, even if you've gotten, I think, more streamlined and something more. The word that comes to mind, I don't even quite know what it means, is gracile, Gracile, which is something like the way a giraffe and a pavlova is gracile.
Okay.
There's something more gracile about your work now than it was. But the thing that and when I started to paint in my self-taught, crude way, the thing, I was thinking of a few people. Amy Silman was one of them, and Milton Avery maybe, or Paul Klee. But I was thinking, among younger people, I was thinking about you because I felt that there was a narrative of, call it a self, as unfashionable as that is, but there was a persona or a personage that was half cow, half person, half stone or rock, half deep soul that was stuck in a landscape or in a reasonably flat terrain, and that was either content being there or was on a journey out of it.
This
So
is
that there was
an image that you had?
no, it's
Yeah.
a kind of, call it, it's like a kind, if there is a buried narrative in the kind of paintings I think you do, and the ones I started to make, which were, in my case, very rudimentary in their composition, but had the existential drama that it was, and I sometimes call them now dolmens, or there's an object or person in a field, and it's probably not even a person, it's probably just a lump. And there might be another
Yeah.
lump next to it, and so the drama becomes,
Yeah.
what is the relation between the two lumps? But it's even though we're all post-human
Lump on
these
lump.
days, it's a human dilemma. It's about like, is one lump friends with the other? Does
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about. Like a lot of the way I think about my work is really boiled down to like adjacency and like something not fitting or not working. One of my favorite titles of mine is an older painting, and I just called it "This Will Break" because I just thought that I liked that I made this system that just wasn't going to work, like a machine part that was going to swing wide of its like receptor or something. And I was like, that's actually my goal. Like, I don't want it to work because nothing ever works for me anyways.
And then something also that we're going to go
No,
on.
no,
It's
no.
something that then like time passes and you're a grown up and I'm a grown up and maybe I'm beginning to paint. I can't remember. I visit your studio again, and that was, I remember, as the like frottage lesson, as it were, because that was the time when you were talking about. It seemed to be a thing that I remember is that it was about that you had one image, one painting, and whether it was done or not, it would just get pressed against another one, and that it was so that the issues of contiguity and adjacency were not about objects in one painting, but were about the process of making, which involved somewhat promiscuous or unintended collisions. And I took that very greedily into my practice, which I still do, that there's always, whatever is left over gets pressed onto something else and gets resolved, saved.
I think maybe the first, there's always the blank canvas problem, and I think that's probably just how it started for me, being like panic in front of, and just like that, and like I have instead, and I'm also like a really terrible art supply respecter, so my brushes are always dead, and so like it just became like canvas as brush.
But then,
And I when I was getting my art education in the 90s in New York gallery world, there was a real like salon style hang fetish. That I grew to be really like allergic to, even though I really loved it back then. Like I remember early Nicole Eisenman shows that were just like scraps of paper, like, and those were really important to me. But like as I grew a little bit and I made small things, I got really sensitive about making small things and their relationships to each other. But I still wanted them to be autonomous, but I also still wanted to respect this idea of like network, the ideas transferring from one to the other. So I think that was a subliminal like manifestation of the actual physical networking between the paintings, and also just solve the problem of the blank canvas at the same time. But
remembering I wrote an essay about I don't know if it was your most recent show at Canada.
it was, yeah.
And the essay is called Matt's Machines, which is, I think, your term for these
Well,
things.
the title of the show was Machines.
Machines.
Yeah.
So it was Matt, and I remember, I think I said at the end of the essay, and at this point I was a painter, so what I was also writing about myself as well as what I was observing, but what I was identifying with you is that the drama or the worth of the painting is that there is maybe something unintended that happens through something like an accident, but then there's the space of you looking at it, taking time, accepting it, interpreting it, leaving it or altering it, and so that the viewer of the painting is, as the gift, is that morsel of attentiveness of the artist having looked at the paint. And so to, like to even say it a little more clearly, is that it's not just what we see. We are seeing an image of an act of attentiveness and to some extent self-acceptance that happened in the past. And so I think that the thing I cling to in your work and try to, why I paint at all, is to cultivate those moments of not like mushy acceptance, but genuine curiosity about the accident. a space of detachment, looking, and leaving.
Yeah, no, I mean the fruit paintings downstairs that are, I could tell immediately that they were built off of stains or accidents, and then you told me that the main one is like the initial like spraying down of paint before you spread it. But
Yep.
yeah, I love sharing that with you. I share it with my favorite painters, anyways. It's like the figurative, abstract wobble of like a Fautrier painting that
Yes.
is like God, like the face kind of comes up out of this murky like scrub, and then it becomes I don't know. I think those are my favorite. I don't like art that kind of knows what it's doing from or ever. So that's
Yeah, and to treat as the form of sophistication, I'd like to build a culture around thinking about not knowing.
But it's also a problem because you can't like cultivate accident. It becomes
Right, you can't cultivate accident.
it's like the fake drip problem.
Right, you can't imitate accidents that have become iconic from the past. But of course, those were great accidents, and they can happen again. And there's no prohibition against. There's also, I think, in your work, and what I imitate or channel from you in mine is that there is no prohibition against recycling or not paying homage to it, just being aware of the relation of next to-ness of us and what we've seen, but the lightest of allusions to those past things.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about I could kind of see you figuring out how much you love, you told me this, but the black background with the blue, there's like a nearness of value that makes like a really fucked up optical occurrence, and I can kind of, without you, I mean, I was getting there anyways, but I can see you loving it from painting to painting and like reiterating it. So
Yeah.
I think those, when you can, I think that like the only interesting thing about a work of art is like the weird confluence of events that made the artist that made it, and like that it's so like I like seeing you learn or like love something or forget it or drop it, or because I like to do that. And then I mean, I used to have a really intense panic about repeating myself, and I thought that it was not a lot. I don't know why I thought it was the worst thing I could do, and I was like really upset. But now I'm kind of into it because I can't. I'm actually totally incapable of physically repeating myself, and I like my ham-fisted, like when I try to paint a painting from another painting, it's just like I'm more interested in how I fuck it up, or like how I'm incapable or how I'm lazy. So like I think like there's a kind of that dovetails with some of this like attention thing.
You're like
attention or non-attention.
Like I know that in your studio on last Friday when I visited, you were showing me, I think in a photo, a painting that had, I suppose, two parallel windows, almost. One was bigger than the other, like skinny rectangles, and that had happened maybe by accident in one painting, but you liked it, and then you did it again. And I was showing you downstairs in some of the big paintings that I call novels, that there's a certain, that I recycle the image within the painting for the comfort of, not for the irony of recycling, but just because it's you bond with the thing that's nearest to you. And if the thing that's nearest to you is something that a gesture you just made.
Yeah, and I mean, I like to pay attention to the stuff that I didn't know was coming, and then try to like those paintings. I made this painting that, I mean, we were comparing, like, I was saying to Wayne that I thought his like mother color was yellow down there, and my mother color is black, like, which I use to like fix all problems. But yeah, this painting I made, I was fixing it basically by covering everything up, and this weird shape came up, and then I wanted to see it on its own, so I made a second painting that was just me copying that shape that had come up out of like me just fucking around trying to get rid of things I didn't like. And then but then I went back into the initial shape and sharpened it up to like make it look a little bit more purposeful. And then I actually had like 4 pieces in this show that were based on this accidental shape that I ended up like I was calling it like the grabber. It looked like this weird, I don't know, it just became its own narrative. And I really like why I was calling those paintings machines was because I really like the suggestion of function or I'm really like design and architecture and stuff are kind of and graphic design are kind of a pretty big influence. But I if I were ever to, it's like suggestion of the functionality that those things have, but not really leading anywhere. So this thing kind of arose as this thing that could be used somehow, and I wanted to like parse it out further and further. So I can definitely see that kind of energy of following your own tail. I mean, it can seem redundant or ridiculous, but it's actually, to me, it's the way that I think, and so that's worth kind of putting out, I guess.
It seems like there's like maybe 2 approaches to futurity that I think we're on the same side of. And like one would be that you don't move forward into the future until you know that it's the right step. And the other approach, which is ours, is that you're going to have to move forward. So you take a step and you take it carefully and you surround it with as much introspection and lightness as possible, so that, so I'm thinking of the thing you said about like the blue, like the blue, the black and the blue in my painting. And so that the bottom, it's black gesso, and then there is ultramarine flash,
right,
which I got from you, because you told me, Wayne, flash. And I don't know why, but like, so for me, the world that opened up of easy, like futurity became newly possible for me as an anxiety-less event because of flash. And so that it means that you hold the little thing. You get the big
jar.
ones, you hold the little jar, it costs $10, you take a brush, and you go like that, and it's harmless. It can be covered really quickly. It means nothing. It's a very basic way of moving forward into the future if you believe that it's important to move forward in the future through simple acts rather than through overly calculated, correct acts.
I mean, for some reason, this is tying into my abandoning of oil paint, which I will forever feel guilty about.
It's not forever.
Yeah, I mean, I do have some oil paint in my studio somewhere, but I can't. And I've talked to other painters about this, where you feel like you're supposed to paint oil paint, and if you don't, you're bad or something. But
where did you learn that? Or I'm actually curious. Like at Yale? Just you can tell me.
I don't know, at Bennington. But and recently I tried to use oil paint again, and I had this epiphany that like, when I was using oil paint, I was turning it into acrylic paint. I was diluting it to this really ridiculous extent. One of the main reasons I stopped using it is because I was using buckets of turpentine, and it didn't want to do that anymore. But I was diluting it. I was turning it into like water-based paint, and then the last 5 years, I basically taught myself this very like forward-moving way to use paint that I could quickly recover from. There was no fatal mistakes anymore, really, with the way that everything could be either like fixed or destroyed or something. So yeah, I think my abandoning of oil paint was in an effort to of expediency, because I was just getting stuck a bit in the mud or something. And I love oil paint, I will always feel guilty about it, but it's just, I realize that I'm just not that person anymore, and it's because I have to move forward within the studio. I can't let something dry and I can't put pause on. I need to so I think, but you do use oil paint. You're successful.
I do use oil, but that's what I use oil. Everybody thinks it's acrylic. They say, "Oh, this is acrylic." I say, "No, dear, it's oil paint." And I'm like dying because of all the fumes of it, and you don't even notice that it's oil. But it was very important to me. I think it was maybe like a year and a half after I started painting, and I had some very knowing people look at my acrylic paintings and gently chide me for their, well, that's for what you're trying for. Acrylic is fine, meaning like how how low the event was that I was putting forward into the world. But then I thought, well, fuck, I'm going to do oil paint. I can ask for advice at the art supply store, and I just started doing it. But it was really I had really was so anxious about cleaning the brushes and not knowing how to do it, and I still
don't
do.
know how
I
to
do
do
some
it.
really weird things. Like I always use walnut. I use walnut oil, Graham's walnut oil,
Yeah.
which I think I know Bobby Bordeaux uses it, but I don't think any other living painter uses that.
I have a friend who uses it.
Yeah, well, good. I think it's great, but I recently bought like a thing of real medium with like varnish and turpentine, and it is heaven. It's like ice. It just things start moving. But
My favorite thing was wax medium. 'cause
yeah,
that
a
also-
Dorland's
but that
wax
kind of-
medium. I think you told me about.
I think that turned it into acrylic. I don't know, but yeah,
it turns
it's
it into cake
yeah,
almost.
But yeah, I don't know. I think I just this is my year of being okay with that. I'm not going back to oil paint. That I'm not going back to oil paint.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think people. So what? We have a whole list here of things that we were.
But you told me that I didn't scold you, but I told you should step it up with
No, okay.
your materials.
That's the story we have to tell. So then, what happens is that I had the chutzpah to invite Matt to my studio in January 2013. And you were very gentle and interesting, and you said some great things, including, Wayne, you should try flash paint. And then you also, I think, said Dorland's wax medium is like a really great way to get cream going. And then, but the other thing you said is, I don't think you really need to do anything different, just improve the quality of the support, which basically meant don't buy Utrecht canvases. There are plenty of them downstairs, but do it yourself. Like, or you should get them made. Go get them made. It's just going to look better. You don't have to do as much to them. And so I thought about that for like a month, and then another painter friend, Lisa Mexon, who also went to Yale, came to my studio, and she showed me how to stretch a canvas. And downstairs is the very first painting I did on a stretched canvas, and it is the most clumsily. It's like the corners are so pasta. Like in their protrusion, but that was a very, so I was living with your counsel, not as scolding, but as saying, actually, Wayne, if you understand that the painting has begun before you enter it with your first, it's already the thing. And the one thing I want to say about this that's so important to me is that I realized that canvas offered a kind of tactile comfort that was really deep. And maybe if there's like one sense that the world is not a comfortable place for me, having to do with textures I don't like, raw, good canvas solved that dilemma.
I stole that advice from because I used to have the worst Wapajaw canvases ever, and actually Elizabeth Payton was at the same time I was seeing you, or like around that same time, that was her only. She had this great Morrissey metaphor where she was like, when Morrissey goes on stage and throws off the shirt, it's always like a Saint Laurent shirt, or it's always like, she was just saying there's no shitty shirts being thrown off by Morrissey, and I was like, and she basically, and she must have known that would have been the appropriate metaphor. But then thinking about it, I think I was like putting my like self-esteem issues on my art supplies at that point. And I like the friction that happens with my self-esteem issues are now firmly implanted within the way I paint, but like onto a well-prepared, like and that's also kind of the reason I raised my scale up, was because I liked kind of presenting these problems of this will not work on like a kind of on a commanding scale, because it doesn't make sense really. That's also why I just think like it's a little bit, it was shortchanging of me to always just like give such short shrift to the beginnings of the work, and it felt like such important advice to me, and it was a real like kind of changeover for me. So I was like super happy to pass it on down.
I mean, I think the feedback system that I could get tactily when I had like better canvas, it was slower, thicker, more responsive. Not that it made the results better or that I had more control, but there was simply more interaction going on. I wasn't just sort of spreading my act loosely on a blank slate. I was actually entering a relationship in which the other had major weight.
Yeah.
So, but I think one thing I want to say is that for me it's very important to, like, you wanted to present something as, I don't know, you had self-esteem issues around the support or something, and that it's funny how, like, I'm not an outsider as a person. I have a job, and I've written about art for a long time, but that it is important to me to, in terms of having, like, shitty canvases that are store-bought, it's important for me not to, I can work really hard at painting, but that the ethical thing is that I cannot imagine that I'm good. I cannot imagine. It would foul the entire enterprise if I wished to make, if I was thinking about making a good impression.
Yeah. No,
That
I
may
agree.
be a failure, but
No.
it's something I cling to.
I mean, I kind of never think, I mean, I can't explain why I agree with that, but I agree with that. I think because I guess, like, doubt and misunderstanding and almost like physically translated into formal issues of, like, misalignment and stuff. But the idea of anything being good, or, I mean, I guess I have my own idea of good, which is bad, or not bad on purpose, but just, like, open, rather than my idea. My least satisfying experience with another artist's artwork is where if I have an idea that they know how they want me to feel, I like, that, or I want things to be open, which I think is maybe contrary to good, or good the way someone would imagine good, finished, I mean, I always get this stupid question of, like, which I ask other artists too, is like, how do you know when painting is done?
And what do you say?
I don't even know. I mean, it's not done. Paintings aren't done for me. I mean, they're done when I'm not super sad about them, or, when they're, like, I like the Picasso paintings from the 30s, where they're, like, super crazy, and there always seems to be one thing that fixed it. They always seem like they're, like, on the verge of totally melting down or falling apart, and there seems to be, like, one, like, key ratchet or something that fixed it, but they're on the verge of, and they're, like, those paintings are almost always purple, and, like, there's those, like, people made out of, like, pebbles. Like, I love that, but they're so hectic and they're so chaotic, but they're finished in a way that no other painter, and kind of like Matisse in the same way, where like, there was that amazing Matisse show that was only, like, 4 years of it was called, like, Radical Invention. It was at MoMA, but all those paintings were so fucked up. There were, like, faces with X's over them, and, like, just those two knew how to, like, make a bad paint. I mean, an unfinished, like, an open-ended painting, like those. So, like, the idea of good, like, I don't like. Yeah, I don't think you should feel bad about not wanting to be good.
Right. I think I feel like that you need to. I have, like, at least as a writer and then now as a painter, that you develop a kind of system of listening for. You have, like, an inner ritual that determines when something will be done, and you listen for the. I think of it as, like, the click in the alcoholic brain that the Paul Newman character in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof says, I'm just waiting for the click. And I think that
That's a really good
click of closure is that you just have for me in writing, it's 9 drafts. And I know that as I get toward the 9th draft, there's an anxiety and a tightening and a finickiness and a wish to just leave the scene of the crime.
Yeah,
and then the click happens, and and then painting is similar.
I mean, I would totally agree with the click. I would not to say that I never know when something's finished, but I definitely have a click, and it's like a non verbalizable moment. But yeah, that's
and partly, if there is an ethics about this, is that you have met the challenge, even if it is a puny challenge that no one else will acknowledge as an agon, but you have met it. And that could simply be that I have examined every verb and adjective in this piece, or for me it's that I have filled it with colors I love, and that time is passing and it's over. It's partly just that there are plenty of contingencies and catastrophes that interrupt life in a way that make things end. And so why not take advantage of those catastrophes as they appear every day to call it quits?
Yeah. I mean, my favorite painters are the ones, like, talk about networking, that allow things to leave the studio that are still thinking kind of for them, and then like make really troubling paintings that are I just think of like this like the last, that wasn't the last Charlene Von Hale show in at Petzel, not the 90s work, but it was just like there was tons of failure in that show, but like if it hadn't been there, it would have been like, it just was like this epic humanity, and it made it all, it wouldn't have worked if everything worked. I couldn't figure it out. It was like a real positive mindfuck in a way. Like, I find her work to be that anyways, but it was really intense for me because there were paintings I just did not like, but in a way that I do not like paintings that I like, if that makes any sense. Just like I don't know if you're familiar with her as I am, but she's a painter who kind of embodies this kind of willingness to like solidify doubt within the work and let it out, and like that's like a model for me, that for like Milton Avery, like all these artists that we've talked about sharing, like they must have been really like having a bit of a hard time letting that work out at that time. Like those late Milton Avery paintings were probably thought of as being pretty far out, but like a permission to not dispel with doubt.
I mean, so there's also, like, if you go to a gallery, you go to a museum, and some people's goal would be to find something like excellence, or say, like, wow, that's the best Poussin. And another person's goal might be, I'm in desperate straits, and I need to find, or even not in desperate, maybe I'm even ecstatic, but I still am curious to find out how to live and what is an exemplary life. And to find, and that the unfinished or failed things obviously give lots of very concrete lessons in how to approach the acts of seeing and shaping that make us want to go on.
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to like where I was at the beginning of grad school, like I didn't want to know what I was doing so much, and that's what I used grad school for, was to get into more of a routine of not finishing. And like I think a lot of painting that I have trouble with these days is not how to live painting. But I mean, I think you were talking about in the interview about like you use colors that remind you of why you want to be alive. I just think there's a lot of like I need the experience of looking at paintings to not be shut down. Yeah, and I think I was making when I got into grad school, I think I was making I was approaching making those paintings, because you can make a small resolved, like wackily colored geometric abstraction, which, I mean, some people, I could be accused of that now, but I don't think, I think, I don't know, I want to be more traumatized by other people's work and my own work.
Yeah. Did you say traumatized?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's call that. That's the call to figure forth the signs of having been lightly traumatized. So now we'll take questions, and when you ask the questions, if you have questions to ask, you need to find a wandering mic. Which Ethan has.
Hey, I'm interested in the Pink Trance Notebooks, which is, I guess, your most recent book. And when I was reading it, I thought it shared a similar spirit to other writing by like visual artists that I know. And I was wondering if that connection exists for you, and also if focusing more on making visual art has changed your attitude to criticism.
Oh yes, it really has. And I would say that the Pink Trance Notebooks they're definitely came, I think, I want to say something very succinct and true, which is that I felt when I wrote them, I felt that words, it was a little synesthetic, like I felt that words were in different areas of consciousness, different categories of thinking, abstract thinking, quotation, and that I could reach for overheard words, I could reach for the different words as in a sort of plastic way, as the way one reaches for gesturally, I could reach within my word cave in my head, or in words around. I could reach here and there. So it was as if there was a physicalized, spatialized relation to language that was, for me, qualitatively and feeling-wise, very different from telling a story, organizing an allegory. It wasn't easier, it just meant it had to do with the gesture of reaching. And even when I revised it, I stood up and I looked at the page as like clumps of language. I thought of the way Andy Warhol said once that he doesn't, when he reads a book, he said, I don't really read, but I kind of just like look at the shapes of the letters. It's a bit like that, treating language as like visual material. We both loved James Schuyler. That was an early bond. And I think he had that relationship to language as clumps of color and line.
Is the next book going to be similarly structured?
Yeah, it is. That's a sweet question. It's very, very sweet of you to say yes. There's going to be a second volume that's going to be a little longer in the same kind of structure. It's going to have a different color, maybe the ultramarine trance notebooks. There'll be a third, too.
So I guess my question is for Wayne. Matt talked about how transferring information from one canvas to another, or kind of like pressing them together, alleviated some anxiety about the blank canvas. So
Yeah.
I thought about you as a critic and writer for 20, 25 years, and then suddenly you want to paint and you have this blank canvas. Like what are some of your steps, or was there anxiety? Is there anxiety? Does it not matter? I just wondered like about that moment, like, because you talked about the first canvas you stretched being downstairs. So I was wondering about like the first painting, or the number of first paintings, or being in the studio.
No anxiety at all, but actually no anxiety at all. Very rarely any anxiety, but I would say something like humility toward my limitations and the material's facticity, so that I have, like, even the very first, when I went and bought, I'd never really drawn or anything, I just bought watercolor pencils and a pad, and when I made the mark was made. And didn't mean it was good, but it was made in a way that is different for me, it felt very different from putting down a phrase which was revocable, possibly. Yeah, I mean, I think that if one grows up as a painter, you have the capacity to see the things you produce as abject stains rather than as events that have their own existence, whether you or anyone else ever likes them. But I had a sense of, wow, I buy the paints, I don't create them from my body. These are physical things, I put them down. How bad can blue be when put down? Of course, then you try to be more artful than that, but I had a kind of very rudimentary respect for materiality, as if I had never walked before, and then suddenly, well, I was putting my feet down, I am walking. Doesn't mean I'm walking fast or elegantly, but I'm walking.
Was there any kind of unlooking that you felt like you had to do? I'm just thinking of someone having seen so many paintings and written about so many paintings and absorbed them in maybe a different way than an artist or something. Like, was there some kind of like purging, or was it just like you and the materials and no history?
No, it was very, with Matt, very much right away I thought, oh yeah, I remember Matt's relation to, as he sat on the floor, to those paintings, and both your having given up on them, and which is why, but that they were available for our contemplation, and that they had a kind of dignity, and they were examples of a way to live a life, which was to make things and have an easy relationship, an easy and respectful relationship to them. And so it was, yeah, I mean, I had like just like if you put any mark on in a rectangle, it already calls up, it's already overdetermined. Art historically is going to look like certain things. So I was aware of those things, but again, having very few tools and no technique, no learned techniques. When you only have 3 words, writing is probably really exciting.
Hi, thanks for that. I really enjoyed you talking about materials and having a mother color and using colors that remind you want to stay alive. And I wondered, I had a question about photography, actually, because I know, Wayne, you have a book of your cabinet work coming out that's all about photography. Mm-hmm. And Matt, I was introduced to your work because I was studying Robert Cumming.
Oh, cool.
Many, many years ago. And you did a show with him at Cherry and Martin.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered if photography influenced you, inspired you in your work at all. Either of you, both of you.
I mean, I love photography, and yeah, I love those Robert Cumming photographs. And I have like a newish friend who has a real photographic. He reads my work very photographically, which I was super excited about and wanted him to go on.
What's his name?
He's a Scottish. He's like a new. Like I'm gonna have a show at this gallery in Scotland, and it's the director of the gallery has this whole read on my painting about it being like photographic. And I was telling Wayne this, and I kind of, yeah. I mean, I'm a polyamorous art lover. So, painting is like maybe the least of what I look at, but. I liked his read was that the transference of images were like almost like primitive photographs, and like I do a lot of the structure gets kind of represented because the materiality kind of seeps through it. And I don't know, I kind of can't wrap my head around it, but I like Robert Cumming to me is, or the photographers I like a lot are more like are not really, well, I don't want to say not respecting photography because we're talking about respecting the materiality, but are like paring it back to its basic capabilities, I guess. And yeah, like
finding the accidents.
Yeah, I mean, there's a photo show up right now in New York of this photographer, Luigi Ghiri, and he's an Italian photographer, deceased, but those photographs are just super magical to me, and they're like, they're very like, attention-paying photographs to design and function and accident, and it's not like super involved in like photo history mumbo-jumbo stuff. It's more just like, I mean, I bet he didn't really consider himself super tied into photo world stuff. So photographers that I like are I mean, like Wolfgang Tillmans is a big person for me, and I think I wouldn't really even call him a photographer, so I don't know. What about you?
I would, in my writing has been very based in photography. My first book, Double Talk, had a George Platt Lines picture on the cover that kind of was really the allegory at the base of the whole book. And my book on Jackie Onassis and my book on Harpo Marx were really about reading the aura of photographs and investigating my attachment to the photographs. So in my writing, that's always been an issue, a core thing. When it's probably for the first year I was painting, a lot of it was like male nudes based on photographs that I got online, so that I was literally learning how to paint and how to draw by tracing photographs. And then I think at one point I discovered that the rug or the drapes or the kind of the windowsill were actually kind of more fun to draw than the body, or that I liked the penis not at this point just because of what it could do or what it signified, but because of the 2-in-1 of balls and dick. Like I discovered abstraction through, but then I think the painter, I also understand the photographic reading of your work, but another artist that I had loved long before I was an artist myself is Marco Breuer. And so Marco Breuer's photographs, which are exactly that kind of return to pre-photography, his relation, his admiring and respectful relationship to the accidental marks created by photographic-esque processes really informs a lot of my painting. And
Oh,
I'm constantly thinking about Marco Breuer's work.
amazing colors, too.
Yeah, yeah. His work, yeah, the sense of revered accident, but not because it's an accident, but because it's simply so interesting.
Hi, I was really struck by something you said about abandoning oil painting. I'm actually a musician, and I find myself struggling with something very similar. This sort of expectation that I have to play a certain kind of music or play a certain way. And I'm trying to understand where this came from. Is this something that people really expect of me, or is it something that I started to assume they expect of me? And so I feel like I'm starting to abandon my oils as well. And I'm curious what that has sort of done for your creative process. It seems like in some ways you're still not convinced that you should have, but I'm curious in what ways that's liberated you.
I mean, I have a lot of guilt and everything I do, and I'm nervous to abandon it because I think it's pretty productive for me. So I don't know. I went to Bennington College, which is like a real home of ABX stuff, and even though it wasn't really, I think I just received it through osmosis because we didn't really talk about it. But I don't know. I always kind of feel like I'm not. I don't know. I think I also studied music at the beginning of my education, and I was told by a music teacher to quit music or I had to decide. It was my dad's favorite phrase, but I don't know. I think it's like everybody. I mean, oil paints are really beautiful things, and they make and people whose correct medium it is make total magic with it, and you grow up going to museums and seeing those paintings, and but I think there's for me, yeah, I don't know. I think that this problem is a good problem for me to have, because this year I really had that epiphany that I talked about, where I realized what I had been doing with oil paint and what I had taught myself with acrylic, that I had made this whole new system, super internally based. So all those lessons to me that was like some of my favorite things that happened this year. So in terms of ones like, I think those are really good problems to have, like those received rules or something, because I don't know. I think it can only, for me, it's been really productive / painful, but good.
Maybe one more question, and then we say goodnight. It usually prevents any question from being asked. Maybe, there is one more, and then that's it.
Hi, thanks for coming out and talking. I have a question, and I don't want it to sound barbed or antagonistic, but I wonder, Wayne, about how you feel showing at a place like this so soon after you started painting, and what your approach to being a new painter is, and instantly being recognized as such.
Oh, I mean, it depends what you call instant. And it
No,
depends
I
what you
understand
call
that you-
recognized. No, I would just have to fill out that narrative a little bit. So I would say that all things pile on top of each other, and that, so if you start in second grade and you start in those aspirations, and you start with the fourth grade report on the Wild West and the sixth grade 60-page report on the movies, and then undergraduate thesis on Ezra Pound, and then graduate thesis, and then starting to write about art, and then the slowness of that in all the years, and basically the experience of being alone the whole time working, every day working, looking at an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and fastidiously arranging things based on essentially synesthetic codes about which words have which sounds, playing the piano for years and years, quitting the piano, coming back to it. Then I turned 50, and after having written about art for 20 years and realizing it's not, I mean, of course, everything is hard, but it's available. One is alive still, and doing it, I must say, it feels like with an indefatigability and a kind of energy and aloneness that is not at all about even any caring if anyone likes it and really doing it. So now it's, I think, since 2010, it's now been 6 years. And when I think of that, I think, wow, 6 years. Let's just say that like many talented people who, let's say, were English majors and at the end of their college years and decided to go to an art school, and the art school lasts for 3 years. And so I say like, well, I'm about 23 years old. I didn't major in art as an undergraduate. No, I'm actually older. I'm 20. I didn't major in art as an undergraduate, but I went to a very low residency, very minor art program, and very minor. And because I didn't have any people, and I had really great crits from people like Matt and Amy Stillman, and then. So that, I mean, I guess I say it doesn't feel instant, and it's this glorious, glorious, glorious moment. Feels like the exception rather than the rule. And I don't mean that to sound self-aggrandizing, but I'd say that it's really important to understand what time feels like when you have spent a life making things, and there's nothing instant about it.
Totally. All right. Thanks.